Your Honor, the defense rests.
Any witnesses in rebuttal?
Your Honor, please, the prosecution has one. Roberta Van Rensselaer.
Roberta Van Rensselaer, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Certainly. Why not?
What is your name?
Real or professional?
Well, you don't mind.
I don't mind. My real name is Ruby Oul. But if we should ever get friendly, don't call me Ruby. I hate that name.
But professionally known as Roberta Van Rensselaer.
That's my nom de plume. I'm a type of Korean.
You mean you dance?
That's the common name for it.
Where were you last employed?
At the club, Shea O'Toole. No cover charge.
And who was your employer?
The owner, George Lefty O'Toole.
You were related to him?
No, I was his wife.
I see. Do you know Larry Regan?
I've met the rat.
I take it you haven't much affection for him.
If we were left together on a lonely island, it would still be lonely.
Why do you dislike him?
Because he killed Lefty O'Toole.
Objection!
Strike it out.
You must forgo your personal opinion and confine yourself to the facts, your personal knowledge. Did Regan and O'Toole do business together?
If Lefty had sunk that low, he would have broke his back.
Then would you say that they're rivals?
Larry might say so, but Lefty considered him an amusement, like golf or fishing.
When did you see Regan last?
See him or hear from him?
See.
About a month before Lefty was rubbed out, Regan came over to the club wanting to talk to Lefty, and Lefty had me sit at the table and listen. He was always doing that since Regan had been trying to muscle in.
What did Regan want that night?
He said he wanted to sell out.
Did that surprise you?
You could have carried me out in a spoon.
Was O'Toole interested in the proposition?
No. He said Larry don't sit long enough in one place to get a shine on his pants.
Why did Regan want to sell out?
His story was he's leaving the country for good. He described some Jane he had on the run, and a lot of important money she had, and how they were going to South America to put the equator between them and the income tax boys.
Did he mention who the woman was?
No, but Lefty knew. He said it was some Jane working in Faulkner's office. A lot of good that would do him, because Faulkner would stop him.
And what did Regan say to that?
He said Faulkner was going away for good. Lefty asked, "You planning to erase him?" And Regan answered, "No, he's going to commit a fake suicide. Won't he be surprised when he finds out it's real?"
Your Honor, we object. This is hearsay and not admissible. Overruled.
Exception. Do you recall the rest of the conversation?
They talked about a prize for Lefty's interest, and Lefty said he'd think it over for Regan.
When did you hear from Regan again?
On the night of January 16th, Regan phoned the house asking to talk to Lefty, and I gave Lefty the phone. After they talked, Lefty said he was going out to Sands Point to talk with Regan and settle the deal.
He left the house to meet Regan.
To go to Long Island. He was put on the spot on the Queensboro Bridge.
He was killed that same night.
Uh-huh. And an hour later, his body disappeared.
That is all, Miss Van Rensselaer.
Now, you are the widow of George O'Toole,
Yes,
and you openly admit that you hate Larry Regan.
I swear to it.
Haven't you allowed these facts to influence your testimony?
How do you mean?
I mean that you are here to get revenge, and that you associate things which you know nothing about. For instance, you claim that Regan had been losing money. How could you possibly know that?
We kept better books for Regan than he kept for the government.
And you said that your husband had been killed on the night of January the 16th.
Yes.
And you swore that he had been killed by a rival.
Yes, and the man who did it was...
Please confine your answers to the questions put to you. Now, you said that he had been killed by a rival.
They couldn't possibly have been
But
anyone else.
you didn't consider Regan a rival, now did you?
You don't have to consider a skunk your rival to try and keep him off your farm.
That is all, Miss Van Rensselaer.
Killing Lefty O'Toole was a dirty trick!
That is all, Miss Van Rensselaer.
If Your Honor, please, I would like to recall John Graham Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, would you have any objection if I were to ask for a court order to examine the body in Evergreen Cemetery?
I have no objection, but you'll find that body's been cremated.
Oh, cremated. And why was that done, Mr. Whitfield?
Well, it seemed the only appropriate thing to do because of the amount of damage to the body.
And for no other reason.
Well, it's also a custom in our family.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, where were you on the night of January the 16th?
I was at home.
And have you any witnesses to that?
Mr. Stevens, I have not been in the habit of providing myself with alibis. But if you must know, I believe I spoke with my daughter.
How many cars do you own, Mr. Whitfield?
I have 4.
And what are they?
One of them is a black sedan, as you are no doubt anxious to learn, Mr. Stevens. But might I remind you, there are more than one black sedan in New York City.
Now, you had said earlier in the case that you had just flown here by plane from California.
Yes.
And you flew that plane yourself, didn't you? Which means that you are a licensed pilot.
I am.
And yet this whole story of Mr. Regan's about you running away with his airplane and burning it in a field in New Jersey is nothing but a fabrication in your opinion.
It is, yes.
Then who wrote that check for $5,000?
I did.
You admit it.
I do.
Explain yourself.
Well, we all know the profession of Larry Regan. And I felt it was better to pay him off rather than any harm to come to my daughter. So on January the 6th, I wrote a check to Mr. Regan for $5,000.
You mean January the 16th?
No, the 6th.
That check says January the 16th.
Well, Larry Regan must have added a 1 before the 6th to make it the 16th.
You mean he changed the date?
You may call a handwriting expert to verify that if you wish.
Kindly refrain from advising. Your daughter and your fortune are your most cherished possessions, aren't they, Mr. Whitfield?
They are.
Then what would you do to the man who stole your money and deserted your daughter for another woman?
Your Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
Exception. You hated Faulkner, and you suspected that he was going to stage a fake suicide. The words Mr. Youngquist heard you say prove it, didn't you?
No.
And on January the 16th, didn't you spend the whole day following Faulkner?
No.
Didn't you follow him as soon as he left the penthouse that night?
No, I did not.
You had no particular information about his activities at that time.
Absolutely not.
You heard nothing unusual.
No, I did not.
You did not hear about the $10 million he transferred to Buenos Aires.
Absolutely nothing!
I killed him! I killed Bjorn Faulkner! I helped that man to kill him! The whole truth, so help me God! I didn't know, but I see it now. He killed Faulkner because he lied. He knew about the $10 million because I told him.
Now look here, my man, you cannot...
That is all, Mr. Whitfield.
No questions.
Would you kindly take the stand, Mr. Youngquist? Come on. It's okay. Now, you told Whitfield about that transfer.
He asked about 10 million many times. Where it's spent, yeah? I didn't know it was a secret, so I tell him that day about Buenos Aires, yeah? That day at noon, January 16th.
What kind of a frame-up is this?
You told Whitfield about that transfer at noon.
Yeah, I did. I didn't know it was a secret. God help me. I'd give my life for Errol Faulkner and I helped to kill him.
That is all, Mr. Youngquist.
Mr. Youngquist, were you alone with Mr. Whitfield when you told him?
Yeah.
Then it's the word of an ex-convict
Yeah.
against John Graham Whitfield. That's all, Mr.
Bailiff will escort Mr. Youngquist out of my courtroom. so, the defense may proceed with closing arguments.
Your Honor. Men and women of the jury, in a few moments, you will be called upon to decide the fate of a woman. Her very life rests in your hands. I am here to plead for that life. Now, Karen Andre has confessed to you today many questionable things, which may arouse you against her. But remember, she is not being tried for those things. She is being tried only for the murder of Bjorn Faulkner, and to hold her guilty of that charge, you must convince yourselves of two things: that she had a motive, and that the evidence submitted to you proves that she committed the crime. What direct evidence has been submitted to you? Merely that Karen Andre threw a body from a penthouse. We concede that. But we deny that it was the body of Bjorn Faulkner. Now, what about motive? In business, the lives of Karen Andre and Bjorn Faulkner were one. Think of Bjorn Faulkner. The state here contend that he had changed his methods, that he had become a devoted husband, and that he had dedicated his life to the task of saving his unfortunate investors. But do you believe that he was the kind of man to renounce his whole life and repent? If you do, she's guilty. But have you been listening to the testimony? After their wedding, he refused to take his wife into his confidences and failed to explain his absence from her night after night. Now tell me, does that sound like a devoted husband to you? On January the 16th, he absconded with $10 million. Does that sound like a man trying to save his investors? And when he realized that he could no longer hold off the collapse of his empire, he decided to stage a fake suicide. And to whom did he confide his plans? To his wife? No. To Karen Andre. Who was to meet him in South America? His wife? No. Karen Andre. There was every possible advantage to Karen Andre if Faulkner had lived. She had no motive for killing him. Now, we admit that Karen Andre helped Faulkner in his swindles. And we admit that the story she told at the inquest was a lie. But none of these things make her a murderess. Remember that. Karen Andre loved Bjorn Faulkner. That is her only defense. Is it in you to understand her? Is it in you to understand the man she loved so dearly? Who was on trial in this case? Karen Andre? No. It is you, people of the jury, who are here on trial today. It is your souls and your minds and the deepest, most secret chords of your hearts that will be brought to light when your decision is rendered. And I ask for a verdict of not guilty.
District Attorney may now conclude this case.
Your Honor. Men and women of the jury, I am not going to appeal to your souls, to the deep, secret chords of your heart, to your reason alone. I have no need to appeal to your sympathies, for the only things that concern you in this case are the facts. And as I enumerate them to you, bear in mind that these are not manufactured alibis, but facts. Bjorn Faulkner was killed on the night of January the 16th. He was murdered. His body was pushed from the parapet outside his penthouse by Karen Andre. And a detective from a nearby roof was an eyewitness to it. And that is a fact. He was already dead. He had been shot in the penthouse, and the recently discharged gun was found in that apartment by the police. And that is another fact. The gun was the property of Larry Regan, who was in the apartment that night, although she had sworn she had never seen him before. According to the testimony of the housekeeper, she and Regan were lovers, and together they conspired to ship $10 million to South America. Now, where did they get such a sum? By forging the name of John Graham Whitfield, and that is another fact, one which Karen Andre has admitted to you herself, here on the witness stand. Now, Now, why would I do all this? Child, give me the answer. Karen Andre hated Faulkner because he had married another woman and dismissed her from his office. So she was determined to accomplish two things. First, to avenge herself on Faulkner, and second, to seize his money and thus ensure for herself the depraved luxury to which she had become accustomed. Both of these things she planned to do with her new lover, Larry Regan. And so together, they concocted this diabolically clever alibi, this confusion of corpses, this cock and bull story, the sheer impudence of which nearly carried it to a success. First, on the night of January the 16th, Lefty O'Toole was lured from his home in answer to a telephone call from Larry Regan, and was later found dead. Then, on the night of January the 16th, they transferred that money to Buenos Aires. On the night of January the 16th, Bjorn Faulkner was shot to death, and his body hurled to the sidewalks, so that the condition of the body might both conceal the bullet wound and make identification difficult. Then, on the night of January the 16th, the body of Lefty O'Toole was stolen and taken in a plane to New Jersey by Larry Regan, and the plane and the body burned. And finally, a check for $5,000 was taken from John Graham Whitfield by blackmail, and the date changed in a ridiculous attempt to implicate him in the crime. These are the facts in this case, and it is a case so strong I can conceive of no other verdict than the one that I ask you to return. Murder in the first degree!
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, bailiff will now escort you to the jury room, where you will vote carefully on your verdict, omitting all personal prejudices and sympathies. I shall ask you to adhere strictly to the evidence. Think of the gun, the fingerprints on it, the countless forgeries, and the motives which may or may not have caused this murder to be committed. You are to determine only whether Karen Andre is guilty or not guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. I ask for a verdict of acquittal or murder in the first degree. Jury is dismissed.
It was a difficult undertaking, but I believe the crash could have been prevented had Faulkner lived.
I found only two valuable things on this earth: my whip over the world and Karen Andre.
Certain peculiarities have led to the conclusion that the letter was forged.
No lights. Karen Andre's white gown shivering in the moonlight. A man in evening clothes leaning against the parapet. And then she pushed him, and he fell down into space.
It was impossible to determine. It could have been a wound.
But he realized his past mistakes, and he was ready to atone for them when I came into his life.
I didn't know, but I see it now. He killed Faulkner because he lied. He knew about the $10 million because I told him.
And then she had me put it on him. Hoped that she could stand in it and burn his shameless skin. She laughed, like the pagan she is, and said it was man kissing a lion like tiger.
He left the house to go to Long Island. He was put on the spot on the Queensboro Bridge.
You think we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. She loved Pop. That's our only proof.
You're wrong. I am capable of murder. For Bjorn Faulkner's sake.
Of the court. All rise.
I know.
The prisoner may face the jury and the jury may face the prisoner. Mrs. Foreman?
Yes.
Do you have a verdict?
Yes, we have reached a verdict.
What say you?
We say acquittal. The defendant is not guilty.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your Honor, we ask the prisoner be discharged.
Prisoner may face the court.
The prisoner is discharged, but I see no reason to thank this jury for a verdict which, in my opinion, is contrary to the evidence. I will strike the jurors' names from the jury duty for the next 5 years.